So about 9 months ago, I made a video about this camera, my Leica Q2, and in that video I stated that I had been using this camera for about 4 years at the time and that I loved it to bits, but still I got somewhat tired of it and that I was on the lookout for a new camera that would get me equally as excited as the Q2 did for so many years, but that was a bit more versatile. And by versatile, I mostly mean that it has an interchangeable lens mount. And so the camera that I ended up buying was, of course, the Leica M11P, which is kind of the obvious choice considering that the Leica Q series is often referred to as the gateway drug to get people into the Leica M system, and that has certainly worked for me. But that is also kind of the point of this video, because I know that there are many people out there like myself those few months ago who do have a Leica Q series and they are wondering whether or not making the jump or upgrading, quote unquote, it's not really an upgrade, but more on that later, whether or not making that jump to the M system would work for them. Because while it might look like the kind of sensible next step for many people, it's really not, because those cameras, the Q series and the M series, or in my case the Q2 and the M11P, are very, very different cameras. I would go so far as to say that the Leica Q2 has about as much in common with the Leica M11P as it does with the Sony a7 IV that I'm filming on right now. And so even though the Leica Q to Leica M pipeline certainly exists, it is not exactly a given that you will enjoy using a Leica M camera just because you enjoyed using your Leica Q. And so that's what I want to talk about in today's video. I want to go through the differences between those cameras and camera systems first, and then talk about some of the similarities, and end by giving you my thoughts on who this upgrade might work for, what I think, having used the M11P for about 9 months now. And so without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so on the surface, these two cameras might look somewhat similar to the untrained eye. And yeah, they are both rangefinder style cameras in a sense, and they are both made by Leica, obviously, and at least partly share a certain design aesthetic. But that's almost it, really. Now obviously the first difference here is the fact that any Leica Q comes with a fixed lens, unlike a Leica M camera, which has an interchangeable lens mount. And while we are talking about the lenses, let's just go straight to the elephant in the room, which is that the Leica M has no autofocus, none. Now this M11P here has the traditional optical viewfinder, aka rangefinder, unlike the Leica Q2, which, like all other Q series cameras, uses an electronic viewfinder. But with that said, with the recently released M-EV1, you can now also get an M with an EVF if that is more up your alley, so I guess that's not a deciding factor any longer. The M11P is also a lot heavier than the Q2, especially in this brass version. I remember how solid the Q2 felt to me back when I bought it, coming from a Fuji X100V. Back then it was a noticeable step up, but when you go from the Q2 to the M11P, the Q2 feels like an empty tin can in comparison. The M11P certainly has some heft to it, but in a good way. It feels solid, it feels dense, it feels just, I don't know, high quality and precise. And so does every wheel and every switch on here. The shutter sound of the M11P is magnificent, whereas the shutter sound of the Q2 is almost silent. Which, don't get me wrong, is great and brilliant in its own right, but it's just different. But wait, there's more. The Leica Q shoots video, the M11P doesn't. The Q also has a stabilized lens. There is no stabilized lens for the M11P. And for whatever reason, it also doesn't have IBIS, which in reality makes it a worse camera to use in low light conditions. Now, I bought my M11P in March of this year, and so I've only had it through spring, summer and fall, and so not during the really dark time of the year. And so the lack of IBIS so far has not been that big of a deal to me. However, we are about to go into winter here, and I guess I will find out soon if not having IBIS is an issue for me or not. But while we're on the subject of heading into winter, another big feature that I love so much about the Q2 here that is not a thing with the Leica M11P is weather resistance, because you see this Leica Q2 is IP54. Is it IP54? IP52 rated, which means that it is fairly dust and water resistant. And again, that's a really big deal for me. You see, where I live in southern Germany, it does rain a lot, especially during the colder months of the year. And one of the great perks of living here is that I can get into my car basically at any time from November onwards, drive up the Black Forest Mountains for 15 minutes and end up in the snow. And with the Q2, I always had the confidence that it wouldn't bat an eyelid in those kinds of conditions. The same was true, by the way, even when I had it in extremely cold and snowy conditions in Iceland. I had it out pretty much all of the time and it never missed a beat. And the same was true on a trip to New York, where it was pretty much raining the entire time that we were there. That was not an issue with the Leica Q2 whatsoever. But had I brought the M11P on those trips, I am fairly certain that I would have kept it in my camera backpack for the majority of the time, simply because I do not know how weather resistant it really is, and I really don't want to find out the hard way. With that said though, it's a bit of a different tools for different jobs kind of situations. I think the M11P is not advertised as water resistant or dust resistant, and neither are the lenses that I use for the M11P or any lenses that I'm aware of that work with the M11P. But with that said, I have actually used the M11P in some pretty harsh conditions, and so far it's been fine. I have no issues to report other than the fact that I was pretty much scared shitless the entire time because I was afraid to ruin my brand new and ridiculously expensive camera. And so even though the M11P is probably also able to withstand some amount of rain and snow as well, it just does not give me the same kind of peace of mind as the Q2. And honestly, I'm pretty much constantly aware of the fact that I have my camera out when I'm out with the Leica M11P and it's raining. And with the Q2, it's just wonderful that I can just have it outside and forget about it until I want to use it. In other words, I don't think that I will ever trust the M11P with those kinds of conditions to the same degree that I trust my old faithful Leica Q2 here. But anyway, since the M11P does have an interchangeable lens mount, there is obviously also the matter of having to buy lenses for the M11P. And I started out with an all Voigtländer lens setup, which to many people apparently seemed kind of odd. But if you want to have a full kit of lenses for your M11P or whichever M camera you're using, and you want to get some fast primes, some Semilux lenses, you should really be prepared to open up your wallet. But the price is not even the only issue that I have in that regard, because not only are those lenses incredibly expensive, there's also just a huge sea of different Leica M lenses to choose from, because they have been around for so many decades now that there are so many versions and variants of each lens. Some have been discontinued and whatnot, and every version of every lens seems to have its own little unique fan base in some corner of the internet, and so it's kind of hard to find out which lens you actually want to go for. And again, since they are so expensive, some lenses are really hard to come by, it can be a bit overwhelming, especially when you also don't know yet how well you will be able to use those lenses, because, and that's another topic, only because you enjoy, say, a 28mm lens on something like this Leica Q2 here, that does not mean that you will also enjoy a 28mm lens on the M11P. And that is very specific to the M cameras that have the optical rangefinder, and probably not as much when we are talking about the new MEV1, because with the optical rangefinder you have frame lines that allow you to frame your shot. And even with the 28mm lens, which is not that wide in the great scheme of things, those frame lines are so far on the outside in the corners of the viewfinder that it can at times be a bit of a challenge to make them out and to frame your shots right. And so even though I still love shooting at 28mm, and the decent 28mm Leica lens will probably be my next lens purchase, I found myself shooting at 50mm, which is my second favorite focal length, a lot more often. So much in fact that I decided to buy a 50mm Summilux for the M11P before buying a 28mm. This guy right here, in fact. On the plus side though, if you find yourself in a similar situation, I would encourage you to still give those Voigtlander lenses a go, because in my experience they are fantastic. Do I think that they are on par with actual Leica lenses, especially Leica Summilux lenses, modern Leica Summilux lenses? No, not really, not in my experience. But I mean, they are just a fraction of the price, and so they are certainly great for what they are. They look very appropriate on a Leica M camera, they feel high quality, they offer a ton of character wide open, and at least the ones that I have used also offer great optical performance once you stop them down a bit. And so you just get a bit of a mixture of everything in there, and I've personally enjoyed my time with my Voigtlander lenses a lot, and I'm pretty sure that I will keep probably most of them around and still continue to use them, even if at some point I have a whole range of Leica M lenses to choose from. On the same note though, even if you have all of the lenses that you want at some point, that brings with it another challenge, because the specific reason why I started my journey with fixed lens cameras, with the Fuji X100 IV to be more precise, about 7 years ago or so, was the fact that I very much enjoyed not having to switch lenses. That was kind of the whole point. And before that, with my mirrorless cameras and with my DSLRs, I often found myself needlessly switching between different lenses because I had some kind of fear of missing out, FOMO, and I felt that strange urge to always switch to what I consider to be the best focal length in any given situation. And yeah, it was just a huge headache overall. And truth be told, pretty much the entire time I was using those Fuji X100 cameras, or indeed the Leica Q2 for so many years, I simply didn't miss having other lens options. Having a fixed lens camera just forced me to get on with it and find a solution, or just not take the picture. It just means that I could not get all of the images that were possible, but I kind of leaned in and got very familiar with shooting with a 28mm lens, and it was a great experience. And so I noticed pretty quickly that I still have that tendency in me to switch between lenses all of the time needlessly, and so for the majority of the time I will try to keep myself from bringing too many lenses. And so on most days I will actually just bring my Leica M11P with the 50mm lens and the 28mm lens, and that's it. If I only bring one lens, that will most likely be the 35mm, sometimes the 50mm, but yeah, that's about it for the majority of the time. Now, if I go on a vacation and I really want to bring everything, I will do just that, but I have gotten better at just using one or two lenses and only switch if I really need to, and if I want to shoot with something else for anything very particular or for any longer period of time. And so yeah, those are some of the main differences between a Leica M and a Leica Q that you should keep in mind if you're thinking about making the jump from a Leica Q to a Leica M. And with that, let's go over the similarities, and that is a rather short list. The similarities are that both cameras are Leicas and therefore stupidly expensive, but also very well made. Both are incredibly good looking cameras, at least to my eye, and both use a classic rangefinder layout, even though, as stated earlier, only one of them is a true rangefinder and the other one uses an EVF. Both take a single SD card. The M11P has 256 GB of internal memory though. Both have a similar mechanism for ejecting the batteries. I'm kind of clutching at straws here, but one obvious big similarity is that, at least if you're coming from a Q3, you will have the same 60 megapixel triple resolution sensor in the Q3 that you will find in the M11P, and the sensor that I have in my Q2 here is the one that they also used for the M10R back in the days. But yeah, I guess that's about it for the similarities. Again, that list is certainly a lot shorter than the list of differences between those cameras. So with that being the case, with those cameras being as different as they are, has the M11P met my hopes and expectations? Well, yes, for the most part, I think it did. So first of all, I found out very quickly that most of the fears that I had going into this experiment were actually not justified at all. Manually focusing turned out to be a very fun and rewarding process, and getting my shots in focus is easy enough, at least for the kind of photography that I like to do most of the time. And as stated earlier, I have also found out rather quickly that I can use the M11P in harsher conditions, even though it's probably not quite as rugged as the Q2. Most importantly though, the Leica M11P gives me the same kind of excitement as the Q2 did for so many years, and I think that is in big part because of the fact that these cameras are incredibly well built and also just really good looking. Now, there is this cliche of Leica cameras spending more time on coffee tables, being photographed by their owners on their iPhone than they are actually out and about being used as a tool for photography. And I get the joke, but while that may be true for some owners, I think the real reason why you see so many Leica M owners taking pictures of their cameras, and you won't see that nearly half as often with, let's say, Nikon shooters, Canon shooters, Sony shooters, and so on, I think the reason is pretty obvious. Because, I mean, have you looked at those cameras? Most other cameras simply aren't worth taking a photo of. A Leica, on the other hand, is a thing of beauty. It's a piece of art that is also a tool. Now, some people might scoff at this idea, but I genuinely think that with how good these cameras look and feel, they are just inspiring in the truest sense of the word to their owners. Picture this: if I have this camera sitting on my desk next to me for the entire time I'm at work on a regular day, I will be buzzing with excitement for the moment when I'm done with work and I can finally go out and shoot. Whereas with my Sony, honestly, I would probably just put it away after a few minutes. It just doesn't create the same kind of burning desire at all. It's just dull and takes up space on my desk. And so I think there's a reason why this concept and this design has stood the test of time and is now as popular as it ever was. Some things just work. They speak to us on a deeper level and connect with us. And I think the Leica M11P just hits the spot. It's an acquired taste for sure though. It's not for everyone, and it also doesn't make sense for everyone. But in closing, if this camera speaks to you, if you have tried out the Leica Q and you've really enjoyed the Leica Q because it's a Leica, because of how it looks, how it's built, because of the lens characteristics, how the files behave when you edit them, and so on and so forth. If all of this is true for you, I think you will enjoy a Leica M camera. And I would encourage you to try one out if you can, or if it's a possibility for you to just take the plunge. There's a bit of a getting used to it period, so don't be disappointed if it doesn't catch on with you immediately within the first few days, but once it's got you, it will probably never let go of you. I mean, I've only had mine for 9 months now, so who am I to say that? But judging by other people who have been shooting Leica M cameras for decades now, and they all pretty much say the same thing, I guess that's just how it goes for most people who decide to get into the Leica M system. But we'll see about that. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I hope this was somewhat interesting to you, and if it was, feel free to let me know by giving this video a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos about photography, cameras, and EDC stuff, feel free to subscribe to this channel, and I will see you in another video soon. Until then, take care. Bye.